Maybe
I think
on the website or
that's
access.
between Debbie Marcus and Rabbi. I
I
don't know how to do
above your
that.
pay grade.
Yeah, been way above pay grade. Okay, so this week in the Torah portion and this coming Shabbos, we complete the book of Leviticus. And we read the final two Torah portions. Gone through a few what we call double portions, double parshas. And this week is also a double parsha. And we're going to focus on just to give you a little overview, the second of the two Torah portions focuses largely on Moses telling the Jews in the name of God that the way to, the manufacturer tells us that the way to a productive, meaningful, God willing, happy life in all directions is to follow the directions, follow the instructions of the instruction manual. And then this is one of two times in the Torah where God says, when we don't, and it lays out some of the unpleasant repercussions, consequences that could be from not leading a life aligned with values and morals. And so it's once or twice in the Torah. It's a little heavy stuff. And it's traditionally the aliyah for that reading. It's all in one reading. That aliyah is taken by the Torah reader themselves. So that's I get to deal with that twice a year. It's because we don't want to quote unquote honor anyone with that. It ends up in my lap, and it's read. It begins with something positive, ends with something positive, and when we get through all of that, it's generally read in a lower tone and a little quicker. The first Torah portion is what we're going to be focusing on now. The first Torah portion seems, from one level, it seems like a bit of an amalgamation of things. First of all, it talks about Shemitah. Last year, Shemitah and Yovel. Last year in Israel was what we call a Shemitah year. And the Shemitah year is a year when there's no and then we let the land lie fallow, and we do not work the field. And it has a lot of it's a stretch, so a stretch of faith for farmers because they want to work the field, they want to reap the crops. But this is it's something that the Torah emphasizes and is still practiced in Israel, and the Shemitah. Then it goes to general rules, some rules of fairness and commerce. So some business rules. Then it goes to the prohibition against charging another person in the family interest on a personal loan. All of these things are discussions in and of themselves. There's an idea of ancestral lands, which we don't have in there, but there were certain lands in Israel told if there were ancestral lands they really stayed within the family, and they were really they were allowed to make long-term leases, but ultimately reverted back. And then it gets into laws of a bit of servants, which we had earlier in the Torah. The translation would generally be slaves. Torah is against slavery. The Torah allows for what we would call servitude to a limited extent. Usually, in extreme cases, a person needed to pay off debts, or a person either debts that they were just destitute, or the debts of theft where they didn't have the money to repay. And there are very, very strict laws out of respect for this person. Using the word slave would bring to mind how we've studied as slaves were treated in different societies. This is not it. A servant had to be treated with utmost respect. And actually, today's Jewish labor laws largely come from how servants were treated, because you have to be very careful. You couldn't give a servant busy work, which you're not allowed to do to an employee either, Torah-wise. Again, it's not the conversation today, because it's dehumanizing. Either give them constructive work, or let them go home, or whatever. Let them read a book. It's not. So those labor laws are servants. Now, what was seen Torah-wise as really, and what we can call anathema, was becoming a servant or slave. In this case, it would be slave to an idolater, a non-Jewish idolater, and it's a little foreign to our way of thinking, because you figure as long as someone's letting me be Jewish, the fact that someone next door is praying to a stone, well, doesn't bother me, or to whatever religion they call themselves. But in the ancient world, if we look at the Jewish experience and the way the Jewish experience is described, those idolaters was not so much about whether they prayed or didn't pray to one thing or another. It was the extreme cruelty with which they lived between each other, and the Jewish suffering that came from these idolaters. And to the extent that even much later in history, this enshrined in Jewish law is, don't take a haircut by an idolater. Why? Because why would you let a guy, someone like that near you with a blade? I never asked my barbers.
Around here, almost all the barbers are Italian.
No, well, the thing is like this: we don't see Christianity or Islam as idolatry. It's a very different. It's a monotheism, not our monotheism. But I mean, that's fascinating conversation, not for here. But I was just giving you kind of a schedule of what we go through in that first of the Torah portions, because it is relevant to our conversation. So we'll start on page 61. I'm going to share the screen. And we don't have the big screen here today because I mentioned before the Hebrew school needs it for their, what's this? Why is this not working? Okay. There's a picture on page 61. And this is a picture of Baron Munchausen. It's called, the Baron Munchausen is an incredible leap. And what it seems to be showing is that the person is jumping with the horse and pulling up his hair so they can jump higher. And what it writes over here, the expression pull yourself up by your bootstraps is a common phrase that means to succeed by the merit of your own efforts. The origin of the phrase was a snarky comment demonstrating something absurd. Now, there is something which is relevant, and I assume it's the reason they bring it here. Today's discussion is not so much about any of the comments, not really focusing on anything I just told you about the Torah portion. As I told you, the modus operandi of this Torah studies literature and course is really to find a way in through the Torah portion into a larger conversation about something in our lives, which isn't really on point of necessarily of the Torah portion, but the entryway is part of the Torah portion. And today is going to be about the limits of our objectivity about ourselves, and in other words, our subjectivity about ourselves, and then the Torah value of getting input from a trusted source outside ourselves. That would be considered a very helpful and important thing. I'm just going to stop this for a second, if you don't mind, and go right back in. So there is actually a Yiddish expression the Yiddish expression goes as "Mekenet aribe springen in the cup," while the cup geht mit. You can't jump over your head because your head goes with you. What does that mean? You're not going to get higher than yourself, right? You're going to be you. And therefore, understand that there's some limits to being human. We're stuck to some extent in a certain condition. And part of that condition is that I'm me. And if I want an accurate feedback about me, it's very likely I'm going to get it from you better than from me, because I see myself through a me lens. Now, I may not trust your feedback because I think you're trying to cut me down or something. I don't. But feedback from other people, there's some sincerity to and real value to that assessment that we can't come up with. So let's start looking at the Torah portion. As I mentioned, on text 1, this will be page 62. The Torah portion mentions at the very end this idea of what we call slave or servant in when a Jew marries, sends himself to a Jew. But then there's the idea of a Jew selling themselves to a non-Jew. And a non-Jew living in Israel, they were called a resident non-Jew.
Who were those people?
They could be of different, of different tribes, even Canaanites. If they agreed to live in peace with the Jewish people, there could have been many of them. But they agreed, that they weren't going to fight and blow themselves up, stuff like that. Okay. Text 1. If a resident non-Jew gains wealth with you, and your brother becomes destitute with him. In other words, so there's a person of means, and a Jew doesn't have means, and is sold to a resident non-Jew among you, or to an idol of the family of a non-Jew. Even to an idol means really that they get sold to the idolatrous cult. They're doing they're mowing the lawn at the temple, which is really beneath us, and we really want the Jew not to be in those environments because it's not healthy for him. After he is sold, he shall have redemption. One of his brothers shall redeem him. So what happens? You say, how much money did the person get? The person's destitute. Person needs now, in order to get themselves on their feet, they need $10,000. It's a mitzvah to help them get on their feet and get out of that dangerous environment. So what does the Torah say? One of his brothers shall redeem him. First, go to his siblings. Or, 49, his uncle, or his cousin shall redeem him. If his brother doesn't have brothers, or his brothers don't want to, go to his uncles. You don't mention his father. Go to his uncle, cousins, or distant cousins, the closest other relative from his family shall redeem him. Or if he becomes able to afford it, he can redeem on his own. So interestingly there, first of all, it doesn't mention right away that when he gets money, if he gets money, he should just redeem himself. That seems off the table. We don't mention the guy's father, right? In those days, it was the father would have the money. The mother would be dependent on the father. So the Torah doesn't mention it. It means his parents. And then it goes through members of the family. So the thrust of it is that family members really should do whatever they can to get him out. But it's odd that the Torah doesn't mention his parents and doesn't mention himself until the end.
So why would it be the people only of the person's generation?
It says uncle. It says uncle. Mm-hmm. It means any relative. The Torah, aside from the odd thing that the parents are left out of it, the idea is that the older ones probably have more assets to be able to. And then first of all, it's brothers. You take care of your sibling. It's not that then you go to the other ones. But the main thing is we should try anyone, and the whole Jewish community should want to do it. But the responsibility belongs to family. So let's go through this a little bit more. Text 2, Rashi on this one of these verses a little bit further. The passages in this whole section are written in a meaningful order as follows. I mentioned to you that there's a string of seemingly disconnected things that the Torah portion brings up. Rashi brings them all together. He makes it into one chain reaction. Says the first scripture admonishes us to observe the laws of Shemitah. First, the scripture says, you're running your business, run your business. Recognize that it belongs to God. And even though God says, leave your field fallow for a year, and your accountant says you're crazy, follow God, follow Shemitah. But what happens if one covets money and becomes suspect of unlawfully doing business with produce of Shemitah? What happens if we're cutting corner? We cut the corners because we can't resist. He will eventually become destitute and have to sell his personal belongings. The blessing of livelihood comes from God. Here, you're you're really acting in a way that's directly refutes that as a belief in your belief system. So God forbid, now we could be disengaged from God's protection when it comes to our making a living. And therefore, and have to sell its personal belongings. As I said, the next thing there is about commerce, laws of commerce. Therefore, Scripture juxtaposes to it, and when you make a sale to your fellow Jew, what is written therein, or make a purchase from the hand, one to the other, hand to hand, something that is transferred from hand to hand. So in other words, we're saying there's Shemitah. You're not careful with that, you're going to start selling off your assets. If he still does not repent, you eventually have to sell his inheritance. So that there was these ancestral homes. First of all, inheritance. Because there is the law, there is a mention of inheritance itself also, not just the home. If he even then does not repent, he eventually have to sell his home. If he even then does not repent, he eventually have to borrow money with interest. In other words, all these little seemingly disparate ideas are really come into a string of a chain reaction. If he still does not repent, you eventually have to sell himself to his fellow Jew as a servant. And finally, if he's still not repented, it is not enough that he has to be sold to a fellow Jew, but he's forced to sell himself even to a non-Jew, and non-Jew there, the idolater, which we say is a very dangerous situation.
Okay, now,
Yeah.
the question there is, if we're talking Shemitah, in the era when the Bible was handed down.
Yeah.
Basically, the Israelites were not industrialists.
There were, so agriculture was, right.
Right. Okay, now, in the current era, shouldn't the people who are running industries also observe Shemitah?
You know, I think the idea is that Shemitah was not done. People say, rejuvenate the land. I think they would probably do more often than that to rejuvenate the land. When you're telling someone to do something which puts their livelihood in jeopardy, you really have to have a good basis for that.
But if you're an agriculturalist and you're putting your field.
So if God says, I wouldn't stretch it by an inch beyond what God told us to do. Because if I tell a barber, take off a year, what if he doesn't make money? Am I meeting his bills? I wouldn't tell the farmer to do it either, but the Torah says it. So I'm just a teacher. I would never make that up. So we really have to keep these things. It's God forbid, you could really hurt someone's life if we tell them, come up with a great idea. Don't do business. You're a doctor, 7th year, just live on your earnings of the first 6 years. What if someone really needs it? What if they put themselves into a bad financial situation because of my bright idea? I wouldn't want anyone to do that for my bright idea. This is the Torah's bright idea about farmers. We stick with that. And even there are many today in Israel. There are the official, the rabbinate, the state. They find ways for the farmers to do halachically still keep their farms going because.
Well, you can still keep the grains in the silo, and you can sell it during the Shemitah year.
Not so simple. Yeah, so you can sell that. You can sell that. You can sell that. Yeah, you can sell that. But it's in the world as we experience it today. It's quite a stretch for the farmers, for most of the farmers, to be able to be farmers and support their families through that if they totally take off for a year. And that's why practice in Israel is they lease out the lands. There's a process where just lets them do what we think is, we would consider to be just run their business.
So if you lease out the land,
yeah,
the word from the Hashem about spending a year not to for land to relax is not going to.
It doesn't say that they run land to relax. I think that's a meaning we have imputed to it, which could be part of it, but the Torah doesn't say that. It's not about relax. It's not about to rejuvenate. And so it's not, there's Torah and there's law, and then there's you want to be able to make sure that within the reality we're enabling people to keep the Torah. So now take this a little bit further. Text 3a. We're talking about someone who had a spiritual decline in text 2, right? He's gone from one step to the next step and descending with the lack of faith. 3a, it says, you shall not make idols for yourselves in the Torah. This is again back to the Torah portion. Nor shall you set up a statue or monument for yourself. And in your land, you shall not place a pavement on which prostrate yourselves, for I am the Lord your God. There we say also that in this part of this is that they're becoming now, this person has unplugged first from a faith in God for their livelihood. And then that eventually is now becoming more, it has to sell himself, so to speak, to the idolatrous community. And who was this? We say that you shall not make idols for yourselves. Where does this come in? This is addressed to the one who has been sold as a servant to a non-Jew. We bring that up because the person, he's not becoming an adulterer, he's a Jew, he's putting a tefillin, whatever it is, but he sold himself to a non-Jew because it got that bad. But here we say to the person who sold himself to a non-Jew, we say, don't become an idolater. You should not say, since my master has illicit relations, I'll be like him. Since my master worships idols, I will be like him. Since my master desecrates the Sabbath, I will also be like him. This is why this verse are stated here. So really talking about someone who has had I didn't go down, I apologize. And that's the verse. I'm sorry for everyone virtual. So text 3a is the verse in not to set up idols, and this is what Rashi tells us is that this is for a person who has been sold to a servant. That, in other words, as a servant to a non-Jew, that we're talking about someone who is really losing touch with their heritage and with their soul, to the extent that the Torah has to say, don't go so far as to start worshiping idols. So this is talking about the idea that can happen to any of us, of where we become somewhat detached from our values. Even if you woke up this morning and you meditated and you thought about what matters to you, in the course of a short time in the day, there's distractions, there's appetites, there's things that we go. Maybe what was very clear to you this morning is not so clear to you today. They're clear to you right now. And the decisions that you make are not necessarily in alignment with what you told yourself, what you really believed 3 hours ago, because right now there's something in front of you. This is a struggle, a human struggle. It was back in the times of the Torah, and now too. So this is what we want to get into in text 4. And we want to use this read this now in a spiritual key. This is there's a concrete halachic aspect to this.
Advance the page.
Yeah, I did already. Because before I forget, thank you though. The Rebbe use this, so let's read this in a spiritual key to understand what the Torah is telling us here. And let's start with the fact that the father was not mentioned as a person who would redeem this fallen person. The person has fallen financially and has fallen spiritually. Why is the father not there? Let's look at text 4. A son who honors a father, and a slave his master. So God says, now, if I'm a father, where's my honor? I'm a father to the Jewish people. A child honors a parent. I'm your parent. Are you honoring me? If I'm a master, God says through the prophet Malachi, where's my fear? Says the Lord of hosts to you, the priests who despise my name. But you said, have we despised your name? In other words, there is a disconnect. God tells us, I am your parent. And disconnecting from me is disrespecting me as a parent. And then even if the thought comes in, you can be so disconnected where I or the prophet says to you, look what you're doing. You say, me? What are you talking about me? I didn't do anything. Because it's not only that I forgot and I made a wrong moral move, even if it comes to my mind, I'm not going to see it as a wrong moral move because I'm living in my own world and what I want to do. So if you look in text 5, bring it down. This is from the Rabbi. We can now understand the spiritual reason why father isn't mentioned in the verse. The verse speaks of someone who is spiritually dead. Doesn't mean really dead. In other words, but that they're not feeling their own morality, their own soul. For the wicked are called dead even while alive, the Talmud tells us. In more abstract terms, anyone experiencing spiritual decline is considered to be experiencing a form of death. What causes this? The fact that the person forgets the Father in heaven. When we are detached from God, we're unplugged from our life source. If I unplug this laptop, then eventually the battery runs out. That's just life. If I am unplugged from God consciously, I'm never fully unplugged from God. We can't. It's not within our capacity to unplug from God. But psycho-spiritually, the way we feel, when we unplug, we don't have the juice. We don't feel it. And that's why we want to pray 3 times a day to plug in. And even though we spent, rightly so much energy and focus on our business or whatever we were doing during the day, 3 times a day, we put that on hold and we try to plug into what we can't see, but what was truly our life force. Like we spoke last week about prayer. So here, the text is going to take us on a little bit more of a Kabbalistic view of this. And we're going to talk about this idea of, again, detaching from our parent. So I want to just give a little bit of a background to this. The term Chabad comes from an acronym for three words, which reflect 3 energies within the divine and within the soul. The soul, the Kabbalah tells us that there are 10 divine energies through which God creates and interacts with the world, and those are reflected in our souls. There are 10 sefirot. The first 3 are called Chachma, Bina, and Dat in Hebrew, and they are intellectual faculties, so to speak. That's a rough translation. We'll speak about it a little more. And Chabad is an acronym for those 3, Chachma, Bina, Dat. Because in the Hasidic movement, Chabad was more of an academic way into generating emotions. That aside, what is Chachma? Chachma, in the Hebrew, they say wisdom, understanding, knowledge. It's those are that they're words, but they don't accurately explain what each word means in this dynamic, because there isn't a word that could do it. Chochma, in the understanding of it, it's the way our subconscious peeks into our conscious. So the classic example of chochma is you're sitting and with friends or yourself, and there's this problem. You need to get from A to B, but there's this obstruction. We can't figure out the way to do it. You're trying to solve the problem, and you can't find a way around it. How do we reconcile this? And then all of a sudden, there's like from the comics, the lightning bolt, and I have an idea. Now, that idea you don't totally have yet because it just hit you. So usually I think people say, well, I think I have an idea. And when you develop it and it works out and it makes sense, then it's yours and everybody can talk. But if you get distracted, or if you say, I have an idea, I just want to say it now, because if someone else is saying, you may forget I had an idea and I can't remember it now, because it's just a peak. It's a little of that, and it feels good. It's like, I think I have it. That's chokhmah. Where does that come from? It doesn't come from the ether. It comes from our own subconscious. It comes from our thinking and our brain power and our intellect that's not readily available to us consciously. And as we're plugging away, I got an idea. So Chochmah is this idea of our deeper self showing itself to our conscious self. That could be with having an idea about how to, fix this laptop. It also would go to faith is seen as a chokhmah function because it's deeper. What faith? Go explains faith. If I had a perfect equation for faith, I'd be able to help a lot of people. Faith is, the equation is to bring us to a place where we can find faith. It logically, but faith is like falling in love. You don't do that. It's not all logic. There's an inspiration, an intuition. So chokhmah, you say that's a part of us where it's a subconscious that shows itself from time to time. So take as an example, and it's not the greatest example in the world, but I look from my experiences. The house where I live, next door, when we lived, first we lived in a condo, then we bought a house to live and Chabad to be on this property. And then eventually we bought the house next door. When we were living on this property, I lived next to people who were Catholics. They had a very, very extensive Christmas decorations. Kids went to Catholic school. I'm a friendly guy, so I got to know them. I had little children. They had little children. We would speak from time to time in the backyard. And they're just nice Catholic people. Last name wasn't Catholic. It wasn't Goldberg or Goldstein, but it wasn't Catholic, but it could have been German. I never really thought twice about it. When it came time to go before the town to rezone this property and where we lived, and I went next door to speak to our neighbors, both sides, before going before the planning board. First of all, you have to notice everyone within 75 feet, and I want to be a good neighbor, and I want to hear what their feedback is and see if there's anything we need to do to tweak the application. So I went in to their house, and the woman there was an Italian lady, and she didn't hold back on things, and I had known her already for a couple of years, and she started getting a little agitated, and she's saying, I'm a realtor, and it's been hard enough to sell this property next door to a rabbi, but next door to a synagogue will make it impossible. So I didn't say anything. I just looked at her, I smiled, like, I didn't have a sign outside saying rabbi, but you say, and then, but so she I guess she understood it was the statement was a little pushing it, and then she said, but I'm not anti-Semitic, because if I was anti-Semitic, I wouldn't have married Cliff, her husband. So I look at him, and I know this guy. I go, you're Jewish? And he says, yeah. I mean, his kids are Catholic school, right? He said, I don't believe, I don't practice, but I'm Jewish. And it struck me, I guess maybe I don't want to make too much out of it, maybe I am making too much out of it, that he didn't say, well, which I hear today sometimes, my parents are Jewish or whatever. He said, yeah. I put him on the spot. He said, yeah, I'm Jewish. But then he kind of tries to water it down. That doesn't mean anything because I don't do anything. I don't believe anything. I'm not part of your people, our people. But yeah, I'm Jewish. I think there is and this is a core part of today's discussion. There is, from a Torah perspective, looking at the realities of life. There's something we come up with against Jews over millennia, that Jews do whatever they want. And there's always been Jews who are not observant of Torah. But when you put a Jew to the wall and ask them, and they can't get away from it, are you Jewish or not? They don't want to be disconnected. I'm a Jew. Now, maybe not everyone is like that. But in my experience, not everyone is like that. because because this is my user's manual, my approach is automatically that a Jew, ultimately, if we get them in the right spot, they're going to want to connect with their Judaism. But that's not across the board. Even here in the ancient, more of the Hasidic texts of 100, 200 years ago, they'd say most. Okay. But it is my operating system where I look and I say, even if they're trying to get away from it, I know there's a Jew in there somewhere. And if I tickle their Judaism, they're going to want it. They're going to bring it up. And usually when people see me and we talk, whatever, that's why I was so shocked about my neighbor. If I speak to them, they let me know they had a bar mitzvah. I mean, it just comes out. It's rare that it doesn't. In this case, it didn't, but eventually it did. So the chokhmah means there's that part of the soul which is not even conscious to the Jew. You squeeze it, it can come out. And this is from the founder of Chabad, text 6a, Rabbi Zalman Ladi. In his Tanya, it says, even the most insincere and sinful Jews possess by birthright in the soul the level of chokhmah that contains the essence of God himself. We're Jews. So it's part of the soul. Turns out that the essence of God is integrated within the soul of every Jew, whoever they may be. This chokhmah, again, chokhmah means wisdom, but it's talking about an element of the subconscious which shows itself into the conscious from time to time. If you press it, this chokhmah serves as the source of all cognition, yet it is higher than the cognitive process that breaks down intellectual matter, for the source of it all. This explains how it is this landing spot for the essence of God himself, the transcendental reason. God, the connection, our faith connection is with chokhmah. Even the simplest Jew believes in God, for this faith is beyond reason. That's what we believe, is that ultimately a Jew, even if they're saying they're totally disconnected, in their head, they found a way to live with the fact that they're Jewish and they're doing what they do. If it comes to be able to say that doing this actually breaks their connection with God, they're not going to want to do it. Now look at text 6b. This also explains why even insincere, and the English is a little harsh, but and sinful Jews will typically give up their lives for God, or opt to suffer extreme pain rather than revolt against God, choosing to do so even though they are completely ignorant of anything about God's greatness. This is on page 67, 6b. Our history is that many of the Jews who gave up their lives in forced conversions, both in the Inquisition or by the Muslims, many of them were not Torah scholars. They didn't know exactly what the details of what they were giving. If Torah is a document, if Torah is a thought process, if it's a legal system, they didn't know what they were giving their lives for. They were not scholars, and they weren't observant. But when it came to saying it's, kiss the crucifix or kiss the sword, I can't do that. I just can't do that. Now, I'm not saying that no one did it, but our history showed us that many not saintly, wise people who loved Judaism so much for its wisdom, they couldn't negate their own Judaism.
By the way,
yeah,
you mentioned the conversos. Most, if not many, or rather many, if not most, of the conquistadors were conversos.
Is that a fact?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. It's I didn't know that, but nothing surprises me anymore. And I'm sure there are millions of Jews out there who don't even know they're Jewish. Okay. Even the little they do know, they don't really process. Their tremendous sacrifice is not due to any great awareness about God's greatness. Rather, it is entirely beyond reason. Is it as if it's impossible to revolt against God without any sort of explanation or negotiation. The explanation for this is because the oneness of God energizes and animates the soul by integrating into the chokhmah that is higher than reason and cognition. So when I speak to someone who tells me my parents were Jewish and I don't really care and I have nothing to do with this, I accept it. I'm not going to be disrespectful. But in my head, I think, okay, That's today. I'm not giving up on you because I know what's inside of you. Why? Because I look through this lens. Text 6c. They bring here from it's actually
The text.
oh yeah, thank you. 6c. This is from a quote from the President of Israel, Moshe Katsav, and it really it's been pushed around. I don't know exactly whether it's fully on point, but let's see it for what it is. They quote Daniel Pearl. If you remember Daniel Pearl, who had unfortunately had his head sawed off by Muslim terrorists. He was not an observant Jew. The late Daniel Pearl of blessed memory, by stating, "I am a Jew" to his terrorist captors before being murdered, proclaimed his affiliation to a religious and national entity and his being part of Jewish history. This declaration encompasses a way of life, beliefs, and views. To be a Jew means an outlook on worldwide issues founded on Jewish principles based on the Bible. Every Jew feels a spiritual bond and emotional attachment to Judaism, even if in the area of globalization. 1 second. No. He hardly knows the basic concepts of Judaism. Even if in his bookcase there are no books dealing with the Jewish faith, the Jewish people, Jewish culture and history, and from the video of his beheading, he said, "My name is Daniel Pearl. I'm a Jewish American from Messina, California, USA. I come from, on my father's side, family is Zionist. My father's Jewish, my mother's Jewish, I'm Jewish, my family follows Judaism. We've made numerous family visits to Israel." Now, I don't know if he was forced to say that. I just don't know. But the way it's being framed by his parents, and I think this because his parents, his father is Dr. Judea Pearl. They and this may very well be part of what brings them some sense of comfort, is that he said this on his own. Even though he was talking to Muslims, he would not back down from his Jewish identity. Again, we don't know why he said it. I mean, just for the honesty of the conversation. But the beauty of it, we want to capture because we know in history that people did do that. They said, "No, I'm not going to." I don't know if he was offered a chance to convert. I just don't know. But we know plenty of people were.
By these beheading people?
No, I doubt it.
No.
Yeah, no. That's why I'm not sure that this is really on point. But they wanted to find, and it was Moshe Katsav also, they're seeing it as and I just want to be honest, I'm not sure that this fits, but we do know historically that Jews would say, "No, I can't do that because I'm Jewish." Text 7. Again from the founder of Chabad. Before they are faced with the ultimatum of giving their life to God, the chacham and the soul of sinful Jews, along with the godly spark invested in it, are in virtual captivity. The body and animal soul are the ones who control their body. So here, the Rabbi Zalman uses this when he dwells on this in the Tanya for a reason that's not clear here. So imagine, let's get away from this a second. For anybody, if you're married and you don't want to do something that will betray the marriage, and you realize you value it, so God forbid, you're not going to go have an affair because that's a real betrayal of the marriage. But saying something disrespectful to your spouse, that's not such a betrayal. There's gefala, not so bad. Not help. There many betrayals we allow ourselves. Well, the big ones we wouldn't. And what Rabbi Zalman in Tanya is trying to get our minds around is that any betrayal is a betrayal. If I wouldn't betray my wife with a big betrayal, I shouldn't betray her with a mini betrayal because I'm hurting the relationship. If I wouldn't betray my God with a big betrayal, I shouldn't betray God with a mini betrayal. That's the mindset. So in text, so what he's saying in text 7 is that until we get something, we say, oh my gosh, if I do this, I'm betraying my spouse. We convince ourselves that's okay. Same thing happens with God. God understands. That's so bad. So before we're faced with an ultimatum of it's either you're Jewish or you're dead. But in order for you to live, you have to say, I don't believe in God. It's hard to say, oh, well, maybe some people did, but see, how do I get that out? How do I say I don't believe, I'm not Jewish, I don't believe in the God of Judaism? That becomes an ultimatum. It becomes a stark decision to make. But until then, we're able to reconcile everything. So I do this, and then God understands anyway, like we do with a spouse.
But if you're even converted by force, in Judaism, you still remain a Jew because you have a Jewish soul. So it's
100%.
irrelevant.
It's not irrelevant. The fact that you're always Jewish, it remains. But the thing is that to say, to publicly repudiate that, say to other people think you're not. I once had a long conversation with someone who was planning conversion to Catholicism. And it was like 2 weeks, it was planned for Easter, and it was like 2 weeks before Easter. And we had a really good conversation. And part of the thing I told him is you're always going to be Jewish, no matter what order they throw in you, you're going to be Jewish, you're going to be one of us. And he said, I wish we had spoken a long time ago, because, I would have made a different decision. I said, you didn't do it yet. It's 2 weeks away. I said, but they're making such a big party for me. I can't say no now. So I said, it's your life. I'll pay for the party. I'll tell me how much they the church is out of money. Well, I'll pay for it. He said, but you told me I'm Jewish anyway. What do you care? They're going to think I'm a guy, that I'm Christian, but you and I know I'm Jewish. It's like, I'll go through the party. You made your case, right? But it does make a difference, because it's a public repudiation of God. And some people don't mind, but it's a big deal. And you see that people over the millennia, people they knew they would be Jewish, even if they got their Catholic name and wore their crucifix. And some of them did it, but many did not, because how can you do that?
Well, if you said it's not, if it's done by force, you told us once that if Rabbi got caught by some bandits and they forcing him to eat the pork sandwich, you're required to eat the pork sandwich.
Except for 3 things. One of them is conversion.
Okay, so conversion is not.
Yeah. Now,
pork sandwich is okay. Conversion is not.
Correct. Now, it doesn't mean that we say you're a bad person because they were coerced.
Mm-hmm.
It's not about a judgment on the person. If they're coerced, it's not them. What we're saying is that if they can find the strength, don't do it. And what I'm saying is that many people didn't do it, and they didn't know about that law. They just couldn't do it.
But it's better to be a martyr.
For the Torah was?
I mean, yes.
That's one of the ones. Yeah, that's one of the ones.
It's better to be a martyr.
Yeah. There are 3 things we give up our lives for, and that's one of them.
What's the other 2?
The other 2 is we would not kill someone to save our own life. And the other one is like adultery. Even if someone's forcing, take a bullet. Better to take the bullet. All right.
Idolatry or adultery?
Idolatry is one, adultery is another. The other 3 of them.
Okay. Now, the corollary of what you just said.
Of what? Of adultery?
No, about killing someone to save your own life.
Yeah.
Are you allowed to kill someone to save another person's life?
I can kill someone to save my life if they're trying to shoot me.
Mm-hmm.
I can kill someone if they're trying to shoot you. But I can't kill someone because someone else is saying, I want you to shoot that guy, that innocent guy who's not threatening me, or else I'm going to shoot you.
Mm-hmm.
That's the case.
Okay.
Okay.
What?
Yeah.
No, I was just thinking, I was gonna ask you for
15-second comment on what happened in the subway with that Marine.
It's not 15 seconds, but maybe afterwards,
Okay.
not being recorded. Okay, text. Now we'll go to text 8. Even an adulterous woman, adulterous man, but an adulterous woman who is obviously out of her senses. In other words, someone's in the passion of doing something wrong, but they're captured by their passions, would control their impulses not for the spirit of folly that conceals the innate love within the godly soul that yearns to be close with God, never be ripped apart from his oneness. Sorry. Truth is, even the slightest sin tears one entirely apart from the oneness and exclusiveness of God. This is what Rabbi Shazalman has as his framing of mind, the guided imagery. And what he's saying is that in general, if we act against our own values because we're swept up in emotions. If someone would put to our face now, you are now destroying your family, it would be hard for a person to go through what they're doing. But they're conveniently pushing to the side because they're in the middle of doing something they really enjoy. It's a willful blindness. When you push away the blindness and you hold in front of their face, then people make different types of decisions. Text 9. Thank you. The human soul, again from Rabbi Shazam, is divided into 2 broad categories: cognitive and emotional. Cognition and emotion. Cognition subdivides into 3 capacities of creativity. One's called chokhmah. That's chokhmah is called creativity. In other words, the creative ideas that fall into our minds, we don't know from where. Processing, which is bina, and application dot. Those different translations. Emotions subdivide into loving God and respecting God. The 3 cognitive capacities are called the mother, the source of all emotion, for emotions are born out of a cognitive process. To explain, the cognitive process, capacity of the rational soul that is able to perceive everything is called chokhmah. This Hebrew word is a portmanteau of the 2 words koach ma, an abstract, unknown capacity. When this abstract potential is realized, namely when the person processes the creative flash to try and understand it properly and unpack its whole depth, it's called bina. These 2 steps are the mother and father who collectively give birth to the emotions and love and fear of God. What the writing here is, just for the imagery, you have a thought, and then your rational process developed the thought and birthed the thought. So the thought, is like the drop of creative semen that comes into your rational processes that got developed. So chokhmah is seen as like the father, the masculine contribution, and bina is the development of the mother. These are the way we develop our emotions, the way we frame and we think and we approach how we feel, how we think, and we think how we feel. So go back to what we said before. The person who's in spiritual descent, who is, to the extent that the Torah says that don't serve idols, because now you are enslaved to the non-Jewish, to the idolatrous society. We don't even mention that the Father redeems him. Why don't we mention the Father redeems him? The Rabbi is saying is because that's a person who's not in touch with their Father. It's a person who's so disconnected. Their own faith is usually, we'll say, there's no atheists in foxholes. Sometimes there are. I know in my life, and maybe I mentioned that once on Sunday morning, maybe you all heard it already. And someone who unfortunately passed away, should rest in peace, when he was diagnosed with esophageal cancer and was advanced, and his parents are not, they're out here, they're wonderful people, but his mother used to light Shabbos candles every Friday night, like her mother did. They weren't kosher Shabbos observant, but her mother used to light Shabbos candles. And they were absolutely his only child, and they're absolutely devastated at his parents. It was on a Friday, and when he was diagnosed, And mother said, what can I do for you? He said, don't light those candles. I would never have dreamed such a thing was possible. I wouldn't have dreamed such a thing was possible. What do you lose from lighting the candles? Maybe it's real. He had whatever trauma. I became actually friendly with him. I feel that that at the end of his life that he was seeing things differently a little bit, but the extent of whatever trauma that people can have, whatever, this is not. I learned that this is not absolute. That sometimes, like I've been saying here, you don't mention the father because it's not there. Now, we say everybody has it. This book of Tanya Torah tells me that guy also had the Chochmah side and the deeper connection with God, but it was so distant that even when he had a devastating diagnosis, and who's talking about Judaism? The thing he picks up from his mother says, "Don't light those candles." That's how distant it was. Yeah,
Anger.
it was anger. Something must happen when he was younger, or whatever.
Yeah, but anger at God.
Yeah, anger of God. Yeah. Oh, well, yeah, but he that could be, but he didn't believe in God to begin with. He was saying. I mean, he had been saying for years.
People get mad and bad things happen.
Yeah.
Because it destroys the contract between you and God.
I
You're
could,
supposed to have, not you, but the person's supposed to have beautiful
Listen
children,
down.
a great job,
Health,
an Ivy League education,
health.
et cetera, health and a beautiful wife and
Yeah.
maybe a girlfriend on the side. And any of those things aren't true, then you get angry.
I can see that the anger of the diagnosis triggered it. Could be.
I mean, I don't know if it's person in general,
But no, I know.
Yeah, other people.
I know people who I think that was true.
I could see that. I can definitely see that. And you see some of the survivors. The anger of God. To me, it was just because he was an avowed atheist until then, but because I mean I knew him. It wasn't my first time meeting him, but it was jarring and almost unbelievable to me to choose that.
I did have a question about the conversions.
Yeah.
That when somebody converts in Judaism, if it's a genuine conversion, is it that their soul was originally poorly assigned? That they were Jewish all along and they just came for recognition?
They were Jewish all along. It's
Even
not
before they-
poorly assigned, deliberately
I
assigned.
mean, deliberately.
They were sleepers.
They didn't know who they were.
How could they know who they were?
Right. 'Cause
They were consciously they were looking at all the signals. They weren't Jewish. He's one
so there's
God
no
has
change,
sleepers.
There's the recognition.
yes, 100%. But they are considered as to have always been Jewish, always had a Jewish soul.
So
Your belief it's 100% case.
The converts,
Yes,
if they're kosher converts, 100%.
100%.
If they're kosher converts,
especially if there's money involved. Then so
is there a kosher convert where there's not? Okay.
it was a good deal.
That's called a kosher convert.
No.
Okay, so now the Rebbe gets to the antidote to all this. Nominate a mentor. The Talmud says, they say a prisoner cannot free himself from prison. What does that mean? We can't jump out of ourselves. If we're bound by a certain issue, we need help from the outside. A person who is struggling with a dependency, the higher power, we need help, and there's nothing to be ashamed of. I think, just before I go to there, the fact that marriage we call is an ezer kenegdo. That marriage is we're a helper opposite each other, not a helper standing by it. Opposite. One of the beauties of a spouse is that you have a secure, loving relationship, and now you have someone to be able to point out your flaws and you can trust them. It's to be able to get there should be, obviously sometimes you don't want to, maybe the spouse is not the best source for the specific type of constructive criticism, but ideally, who more can you trust than someone who knows your strengths, knows your weaknesses, knows your fears, knows your aspirations, and is calling attention to something that they say stands in your way.
Well, Mark, comedian says, you don't need God when you have a wife to tell you what you did wrong.
Who says that?
Bill
Bill
Moore.
Maher.
The guy
You know, so I've heard a lot of wisdom.
never been married.
I've heard a lot of wisdom out of that guy. That's it. It's sure. Text 11. For a Jew who has been sold into the ownership of a non-Jew. Again, we're talking about this as conceptually, this is what happened, and now we're talking about that person. They're totally under the control of a again. Then it was an idolatrous society, but this is a non-Torah perspective. The memory of his Father in heaven is completely forgotten. So much so that it's as if he never longer has any control over himself. In such a situation, it's impossible for the slave to redeem himself. As per the rule, a prisoner cannot free himself from prison. His redemption must come through outside intervention from someone in a position above his station who is not subject to the same servitude. That is why the first option in the verse is for the relative to redeem him, namely someone from above pulling him out of his desperate situation. We don't talk about him redeeming himself. We don't talk about his father redeeming himself. We don't talk about his father redeeming himself because, again, reading in a spiritual key, he doesn't have that chokhmah idea about himself because what he wants. He's so trapped in it. How's he ever going to get out of it? We talk about the people who care about him, helping him out. So what do we do? Get a mentor, text 12. And this, even someone who is completely upright, there's certainly matters in which they can improve. However, inasmuch as everyone loves themselves, a person cannot rely on themselves to be entirely certain that they are behaving in an appropriate manner. The solution for this problem is, as the Mishnah states in the chapter Ethics of the Fathers, Pirkei Avot, appoint a mentor for yourself. Everyone should nominate someone greater than themselves with whom to ask and clarify all their personal affairs, be it in their efforts to abstain from negativity or proactively doing good things. So I've made a very big campaign out of this. Actually, he at one point asked everyone to write in to him to let him know, let me know who you chose. It was just, it wasn't public. It was between me and him. He wanted us all, and I was a student then. In zone, and you have to check in, and now it could be maybe one person in one area of my life, another person in another area of my life. Doesn't mean one person has wisdom for everything. The point is that we're prepared to take insightful feedback from someone else. Now, it doesn't mean that the person has to be greater than me, just that they have, first of all, they're objective, not subjective, and that they have a perspective in this area. We should add text 13 that even in the case of an advanced pious Torah scholar who has trouble finding someone greater than them, as the Meiri. The Meiri was a great rabbi, 1300s, of Menachem Meiri. He suggests, even if one cannot find a scholar of their own stature, they should nominate someone inferior. For people who are unable to see the solution, they need most like someone else can. Accordingly, the Mishnah's directive, appoint a mentor for yourself, means even if they're not worthy in general, obviously they're worthy of your situation, don't choose them. It is explicitly stated with regard to such situations that an element of coercion is necessary. The word appoint here connotes an active effort that requires exertion, investment, and sometimes even a little force. And force, in other words, to ask someone and say, I don't really want, but you obviously can't force someone to be the mentor, but also to force yourself to be able to listen. And text 14, we're getting to the end here. We ought to bring up something that, even though the Mishnah commentators may not bring it up, we all know it. This is from the Rabbi. Even after nominating a mentor, we oftentimes question whether we must bring up every specific thing. Perhaps the question can wait. I don't need to ask this. This is a simple one. I got the answer. I got this covered. So a great ethical principle teaches us how critical it is to ask the mentor everything. In fact, precedence should be given to those matters about which you're fairly certain you're not behaving appropriately, or worse yet, then to matters about which you doubt. The things you have heard from others are not up to snuff. Someone turned up their nose. This is in Yiddish. Okay. And finally, text 15. The very knowledge that one will occasionally be held accountable to another human being will automatically improve behavior. Oops, I'm sorry, I didn't do this. I'm going to leave this I'll read this 15 while we agree there. Very knowledge that one will occasionally be held accountable by another human being will automatically improve behavior and motivate them to increase all positive holy activity. So here, one of the things that Rebbe was in favor of was when you're making a resolution, a good resolution, share it, because then you'd be embarrassed. So then once you told people you're going to do it, you can't just say, forget it. I mean, obviously, you didn't want to embarrass anyone, but the point is, you'd be held accountable by other people. So here are key points. I'll go back to share the screen a second. Okay, key points. The story of a slave seeking redemption in our parish is also the story of a person in spiritual decline. Number 2, the cause of the spiritual decline is forgetting one's Father in heaven, God. Number 3, every Jew possesses an innate and supra-rational commitment to God deep in their soul. The only way it can be forgotten is when it is repeatedly quashed by neglect or overindulgence in materialism. Number 4, regardless, this innate commitment will eventually come out. And number 5, as subjective we are inherently incapable of making honest assessments and decisions about and for ourselves. Every person must appoint a mentor for themselves. Okay. So that's for today. Are there any questions? Not a little late. Okay. Have a great week.
Thank you, Rabbi.